All right, the meeting has started. Welcome everybody to the 2022 annual WASCA member meeting. I'm honored to see all your shining faces this morning and some of your dark screens as well. So thank you for being here and taking the time out of your day to join the meeting. We have a lot of meat and potatoes in this meeting today. I'm hoping that we'll have some time for discussion, probably closer to the end. So we're going to try to breeze through as much of it as possible. So we've got some big topics on the agenda for today. So greetings, just in case you don't know, my name is Courtney Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of WASCA. Been in this role for a little bit over a year and a half now, and I'm honored to be serving our Cheesemakers. Housekeeping items. So the meeting is being recorded. We're doing that so that anybody who couldn't make it today can go back and view the meeting later. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel, and we'll share the link once I get that up this weekend. And I'm also going to ask everybody to keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, just so that we have a good quality of call. But do feel free to use the chat function if you have questions, or there's like a little hand raise function. If you can figure that out, we can use that too. That one seems to be the hardest one for people to figure out. So yeah, that's the housekeeping. At this point, I am going to go ahead and introduce the current WASCA Board of Directors. If everyone's online, just go ahead and say hi. So we'll start with our current board president, Megan McKenna of Cherry Valley Dairy and Duval. I don't know if Carrie made it. Carrie Hunter is the secretary from Pine Stump Farms in Omak.
Yes, I'm here.
Yep. Hi, Carrie. Our treasurer, Kalijah Paraska of the Cheese Connection in Seattle.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Kalijah. Jessica Gigot of Harmony Fields in Bow. There she is. John Haugen of WSU Creamery in Pullman.
Hello.
Lucas King of Evergreen Creamery in Trout Lake. Not here yet. And Rachel Lucas, Cheese Lady Loves Wine, couldn't make it today because she has to work at her day job, but Rachel's also a member of the board. And thank you to our board members. At this point, our outgoing board president, Megan, is going to say a few words.
Well, thanks, Courtney. Can everybody hear me? Great.
Yep.
I just want to be super quick because we have so many exciting things to talk about today. I feel like last year I was really excited to take this role, and I was looking forward to the end of the pandemic and things opening up and flowers and roses. And I kind of feel like I'm having a little Groundhog Day where I'm in the same position, a little deja vu, looking forward to things opening up, etc. But there are so many reasons to be positive going forward with our community. First of all, I'm so excited that John will be taking over as president. I don't think WASCA could ask for a better person for that role, so that's fantastic. Another reason I'm so positive is that this community of cheesemakers and small business owners and retailers is so resilient. We've been through so much these last couple of years. Heat domes and pivots and the endless adaptations we've had to work through. And people are coming through with shining colors, and I'm so proud to be a part of this community. And everyone is keeping their business going and thriving, and it's just really impressive. And the last thing that's making me feel positive for this year is this dang grant that we worked so hard for. Courtney's going to get into all the nitty gritty and all the folks who helped us in the WASCA community, but I'm so, so grateful for everyone who helped us over the finish line. So many people put blood, sweat, and tears into this, and I'm so honored to be a part of that. And probably the best thing to come out of this dang grant is Courtney. We're going to be able to take our very part-time executive director to full-time. And I think we should all be so grateful for that because we're so lucky. Courtney's a fantastic person to have in this role. And she worked so hard on this grant and came up with some really fabulous ideas to move our community forward. So thank you, Courtney. And I'm really excited to see what you do in the next couple of years. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. And yeah, thank you. So now we are going to hear from our board treasurer, Kalijah Paraska with the annual treasurer's report. Kalijah?
So as of December 31st of 2021, the bank balance, and this doesn't include any grant funding because currently we're waiting to finish documentation to make draws, is $25,017.44. And as of what's in this balance currently, we have about $3,400 of the annual membership contributions for 2022. Since that time, we've received approximately another $1,500. So in total, we have about $5,400 to $5,500 in 2022 membership contributions. Historically, last year being a pretty significant year, our contributions were around $11,000. So we're hoping that we'll continue to see an additional $5,000 flow through with membership fees to bring this balance up. We haven't just perfectly set the budget yet for 2022, which historically we would have done at this time because the grant changed a lot of the way that we're going to do our funding. One of the things that we're going to need to add for the first time into the budget of WASCA is fees to cover an attorney and fees to cover a certified public accounting firm, because the grant has certain requirements in it whereby when we looked at it as a committee, we felt we needed legal advice to make sure this grant is structured specifically and succinct from the normal responsibilities of WASCA. The way that the grants work with the federal government is they are pretty easy to get, but if they come and do an audit, they're pretty easy to take that money back. And this grant is under $750,000, so it doesn't require a formal CPA audit. So that actually makes the bookkeeping even more difficult in that we don't have to have a CPA doing the bookkeeping for audits. But it means we internally, as a treasurer, need to keep books as good as a CPA, so that if the USDA audits and they ask the difference between what Courtney is doing for WASCA versus for the grant, we can delineate that. If there's any ambiguity on those succinct responsibilities, they have the legal right to take the money back, and they do that. So we have hired an attorney to not at this point, but we interviewed one. But what we're going to do is have them look over Courtney's responsibilities for WASCA versus the grant. We're going to delineate those in two separate contracts. And then we're also going to be speaking to a CPA firm this coming week so that I can ensure that the way that we're setting and establishing the books for the grant separate from the way WASCA is set up, that those two speak to each other in event of an audit. We don't, at this point, specifically have a budget per se for the accounting fees or the legal fees. Once we have that set, which we're hoping will be within the next week, then we can formalize our budget for 2022, bring that back to the board to present that so they know how much we're going to have to set aside as liabilities for 2022, which as treasurer will give me a benchmark of how much of that $25,000 will actually be left after those liabilities and obligations. So we're hoping to have something for you to look at within like the next week and a half to 2 weeks, because it'll take John, Courtney, and I, once we put everything together, to make sure it's fine-tuned. And then we'll be looking for your comments and feedbacks on that so that you can see how the money will be spent that we currently have.
All right, thanks so much, Kalijah. Appreciate that. All right, so at this point, we've reached a long-awaited moment. I'm going to lead an introduction to our 2021 Farmers Market Promotion Program grant project, which, as Kalijah alluded, is a really big deal for WASCA in many more ways than one. And it's going to be a big undertaking for us over the next few years. So I'm going to go ahead and share a little presentation on my screen. Okay. I'm going to preface this introduction by saying that I'm about to throw a lot of information at everybody. This grant application was 35 pages. And this is kind of to introduce you all to the grant. We'll let it soak in, and then we're going to have another conversation and dig deeper into the grant initiatives, hopefully early next month in February. I am going to send out a questionnaire probably on Monday next week to kind of gauge everybody's individual interest in each of the initiatives, see who wants to take part in what. The biggest thing we want to make sure is that the grant benefits everybody who's involved, and that you get the most benefit possible. And I'm also going to share this presentation so you can go back over it and look at it if you have any questions afterwards. Okay. Before we get too deep into the nitty gritty of the grant, I first want to give a big shout out to a couple of groups of people. The first group is everyone who helped pull together this grant application. As I mentioned, it was 35 pages. It's huge. The grant application committee, Megan McKenna, Lindsay Slavin, Jessica Gigot, and Julia Powers all helped work on this grant. Patrick Bleck helped get a lot of our in-kind donations. John Haugen, Carrie Hunter, Kalijah Paraska, Steve Jones and Janae Muha, and Sarah Hartman from the Northwest Agriculture Business Center also advised on the grant. We'd also really like to thank our match partners and in-kind donors who, without their support, we would not have this grant funding. And just a quick reminder that if your camera is not on mute, go ahead and mute yourselves. But we really want to send a big thank you out to Mark Bates of Bates Consulting, Dave Bain of the Cheese and Meat Festival, Dairy Farmers of Washington, Tim, Steve, and Deb, DPI Specialty Foods, thank you, Mark. Genuine Skagit Valley, thank you, Blake. Tilth Alliance, thank you, Melissa. And Washington State University Creamery, thanks again, John. So these people were hugely instrumental in us getting this grant application approved by the USDA. So this is a paragraph that I'm not going to read directly from the USDA website about what the Farmers Market Promotion Program is. What this grant really is, it comes from the Agriculture Marketing Service. It provides funds for projects that help market an agricultural good. In our case, that's cheese. Other kinds of groups who've gotten these grants are seafood groups or cattle processing facilities, things like that, that focus on one agricultural product and marketing it to other people, namely customers who are going to buy those products in their local area. So the focus is really on local cheese sales in Washington and our immediate environs. And I know we don't like to live in the past, especially after these past 2 years, but just for scale, I wanted to include a quick little timeline of this application. We have been sitting on this project for 8 months now. We got the application for the grant in May 20 of last year was when the USDA announced it. We had a month to submit our application, to submit a 35-page application to the USDA. And then when we submitted it in June, they told us they would let us know one way or another if we had got it in September or October. On September 30th, they asked us to clarify and edit some things in our application. And it wasn't until October 27th that we received our notice of award, but we couldn't say anything about it because they told us to keep it a secret until the USDA made their formal announcement. So we were all kind of dying on the inside, not able to tell anybody. And on November 29th, we found out that the USDA had secretly announced the award without telling us that we could go ahead and share the word. They put out a press release on November 23rd. And on December 7th, we told you all we had gotten this exciting grant award. And it wasn't until now that we've had enough information to go ahead and introduce the grant project to you and tell you what we're going to be doing. So this presentation has been 8 months in the making, and we're really excited to tell you what we are getting. For scope on what this grant project is, or where we sit in the ecosystem of federal grants, the Farmers Market Promotion Program is part of kind of a dual set of grant programs from the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service, the AMS. That is the FML-FPP, the Farmers Market Promotion Program, and the Local Food Promotion Program together. Those two joint programs awarded $75.4 million this year to 172 projects in 41 states. FMPP alone awarded $37.5 million to 84 projects. WASCA's grant proposal was the only dairy-focused project out of all of FMPP awards. So out of 84 projects, we're the only one that has anything to do with dairy or cheese. There are also two other cheese and dairy projects within the FML-FPP system. This year, two groups, the Maine Organic Milk Company and the M3 Co-op Feasibility, both received LFPP awards this year. And those are for projects that are focused on supply chain activities, like developing processing facilities and distribution and aggregation sorts of things. So we're the only cheese or dairy project that's going to be marketing anything with USDA funds out of the 2021 grant year. So the big question is, how much is our award? We have 3 years of funding. Our period of performance started on September 30 of last year. We didn't know that we had gotten the grant yet. That was actually the day that they asked us to answer some questions and clarify our application. And then our grant lasts until September 30 of 2024. We have received federal grant funding in the amount of $334,795.49. And that is supported with matching and in-kind funds. One of the stipulations of the application was that we needed to provide a 25% match to the federal funds that we were asking for, either in cash or donations or in-kind labor hours or products. And so with our in-kind sponsors, we were able to gather up $138,848, which is actually more than 25%, I'm proud to say. Together, that's a total investment over the next 3 years of just under $500,000, $473,643 and some change. So for everybody in cheese in Washington, this is a great investment in our industry. Really excited about it. So as part of our project, we had 4 objectives that we wrote into our grant. I'm going to go into more detail on each of those in a few more slides. But our first objective is educational opportunities for cheesemakers. That's going to be virtual and in-person trainings to increase food safety knowledge, regulatory understanding, cheesemaking skills, and business know-how. Our second objective is a dedication of a Washington Cheese Month by our state legislature. That's going to celebrate the work of our state's cheesemakers and increase consumer knowledge of our local cheeses in the state. The third objective is a Meet the Cheesemakers event series, which will involve in-person, virtual, and self-guided events taking place throughout the state that are designed to bring cheesemakers together with their immediate communities and forge relationships between cheese lovers and the people who actually make their food. And then the fourth objective, which kind of dovetails into the Meet the Cheesemakers series, is a retail marketing campaign, which will be a concerted effort to encourage local grocers to elevate the local cheeses that they stock and increase awareness about those products to their customers. This objective includes both in-store marketing materials and a cheesemonger education program. So there's a lot there. I just want to point out a few things what this grant project will do. It will fund events that encourage Washington creameries and cheesemakers to interact directly with consumers. It will pay for the development, design, and printing of marketing materials that Washington cheesemakers can use at all sales levels. It will support educational offerings for cheesemaker development and training. It will enable me to work full-time to accomplish those objectives. And most importantly, it will create greater awareness of Washington's 53 licensed cheesemakers and the diverse cheeses that they craft. What it will not do, the AMS is very strict in what they will and will not allow. It will not fund the purchase of any cheese samples or other food or alcohol. It will not allow us to promote a single brand or entity. So we can't print advertising just for WASCA, and we couldn't print generic advertising for Washington made or Washington grown. What we can say is Washington cheese or Washington made cheese. The emphasis has to be on the agricultural food group, which is perfect for us because we are all about cheese. The grant will not allow us to purchase equipment, land, or buildings, and it will not pay for fundraising or financial campaigns. So just to break down the initiatives, objective 1, the Cheesemaker educational opportunities. 3 of our in-kind sponsors are going to provide some educational opportunities in conjunction with our grant project. So Mark Bates of Bates Consulting is going to offer this year a PCQI refresher and a food safety refresher. Next year, he's going to offer another PCQI refresher, and in 2024, he'll do a training on FSMA traceability rules. Dairy Farmers of Washington, each year, this year, 2023 and 2024, will offer an annual workshop on food safety and nutrition of a topic of their choosing. And then WCO Creamery is offering this year the advanced cheese making short course. Next year, they'll do the basic plus cheese making short course. And then each year of our grant period, they'll also be offering a pasteurization workshop. So we'll have lots of educational opportunities for cheesemakers and industry folks at every level of experience, from basic training to refreshers for the more seasoned folks. And we'll have other educational things that will pop up alongside these, but these are the main ones that were written into the grant. Our second initiative, our objective, is Washington Cheese Month. So for this, something that we've been asked for a while is a dedicated cheese month to celebrate our cheesemakers. To do that, we're going to solicit support from some key players to engage with the state legislature. We will lead a discussion of our Washington cheesemaking community's importance in our state's agricultural economy and local food system. You know, a lot of the emphasis is on apples, wine, beer, cattle farming. Well, cheese is kind of a big deal also. We know that, but I don't think that as many folks are as aware of that. We have 53 cheesemakers in Washington, which is actually the most in the entire West after California. And we should really be known for that. So we want to have those conversations and get our legislators to pass an official Washington Cheese Month. So far, the proposed month has been June, but that's open to discussion. And we hope to use the inaugural Washington Cheese Month to kick off our 3rd and 4th objectives. So objective 3, the Meet the Cheesemakers series, has a lot in it. So it has 2 larger festival style events. The first proposed is a spring cheese festival in May and a Bellingham cheese and beer festival. There will also be 8 more intimate Meet the Cheesemaker market style events featuring an educational seminar for consumers. And we're gonna, for those we'll travel around the state to 8 different counties, and we'll do at least 1 event in each county. Those counties are King, Klickitat, Okanogan, Pierce, Skagit, Thurston, Whatcom, and Yakima. So we'll be splitting those up over 3 years. There's also going to be a scavenger hunt called The Hunt. The Vermont Cheese Council created this idea, and they have given us their blessing and encouragement to create our own. You can go check theirs out on their website. It's basically breaks the state up into different regions and gives people a list of things to look for and do when they go visit those parts of the state. It could be history and cultural things, shopping, like buying cheese, natural things like parks and, you know, just anything in a community to get people out and exploring, which we'll be working on for Washington. We're also hoping to do a passport program with coupons and incentives to get people to shop local, specifically for cheese, visiting any of the creameries who have a shop or a farm store, farmers markets, things like that. And another important part of this is a creation of professional photos and videos at up to 35 small and medium creameries. You know, in our digital world today, it's very important to have the images that people can see to get to know the cheesemakers, people who make their food, to get them out on the internet. So the creameries will be able to use those materials for their own marketing. WASCA will use those materials for our marketing, and then we'll also be able to use those things for the retail marketing campaign, Objective 4, which that will allow us to create materials for use in a retail setting, to take the onus off of retailers, marketing teams to create those materials themselves. We're going to hope to work with at least 4 local regional retailers to execute a Choose Washington Cheese campaign. So that'll involve our cheese stickers, cheese maps, and some sort of tabletop signage, shelf talkers, things like that. And a part that I'm really excited about as a cheesemonger myself is the development of a cheesemonger education program to support those retail promotions. So we will be creating workshops and trainings for best practices and cheese care, and also an archive of local cheeses and tasting notes so that our cheesemongers in our state and our region have all the information they need to be able to talk to customers about local cheeses and get them excited about it. And retailers who do have on-site cheesemongers, those are the most important people to get cheese out into the hands of the public. So those are our objectives. This is just a visual.
Courtney, I
Yes.
was just, pardon my interruption, but I'm not too sure who Heather Chitty is. Can Heather please mute her microphone? Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Heather. So this is just like a visual representation of our deadlines. As you can see, a lot of these are TBA deadlines, which means that we haven't set a date yet. But we did have to have kind of a range in our grant application of when we plan to have certain things done. We can ask for permission to extend if we need to. But this is just to give you the scope of everything that we're going to be doing and kind of when we need to have it done by. Okay, and this, just for those who have been curious, this is a proposed schedule of our Meet the Cheesemaker events and festivals, totally up for discussion. The goal is going to be to split them up around the state so that no one corner of the state gets all of the attention and that we can travel around as much as possible. In coming up with this, we also had to think about avoiding calving and kidding season, avoiding fire season as best as possible. And also there are some venues that I've been talking to. Some of them are booked up through the end of 22, 23. So that also makes a difference in when we can do these things. And we'll really dig into these partially with the questionnaire that we're going to be sending out and in the meeting in the beginning of February. So what does this mean for us? If you are a WASCA member, if you are a cheesemaker, this grant project is going to help promote your creamery and events that will benefit you. It will increase your opportunities to interact with and market your cheeses directly to consumers. It's going to pay for Washington cheese stickers to help you identify your cheeses as local wherever they're sold. It's going to enable us, WASCA, to help promote Washington creameries through our events, festivals, retail marketing campaigns, and the development of materials to help do that. It is going to help us arrange for custom photos and videos to be made at our small and medium-sized creameries to help them use in their business marketing materials. It's going to allow, if you're a business or a corporate sponsor, it's going to give you opportunities to engage in consumer-based and industry events. This is something we haven't had very much of over the past 2 years, and we're still going to have to be a little bit slow in rolling some of these things out comfortably for everybody's comfort level and safely, but it will give you opportunities to engage. And if you're a cheese lover, cheese enthusiast, it's going to give you more opportunities to interact with your favorite local creameries and hopefully meet some new ones to learn more about the folks who produce Washington cheeses. And for our community at large, this grant is really going to strengthen our cheesemakers' ability to draw repeat sales of safe and healthy cheese and sustain growth in the industry. It's going to increase our consumer knowledge of Washington cheeses, which something I learned working behind the counter still lags behind knowledge of domestic cheeses made in other regions. and it's going to build relationships between cheesemakers and consumers. And the biggest goal is to encourage shoppers to choose local cheeses over domestic commodity or imported cheeses. You know, you still hear people who say they won't buy American cheese because American cheese isn't as good as European cheese. And not only do we need to change that perception on a large scale, but we also need to convince them that there are local cheeses that are excellent and better than the imported cheeses that they can get. So that's a lot of the work that's going to happen with this grant. So what are the next steps? So you're going to get this survey that's going to go out to the membership and to our listserv to see who's interested in participating in which initiative. It's going to, that is going to inform an in-depth discussion of our grant initiatives in February. We're really going to focus on what we're getting done this year, who wants to do what, when, what makes the most sense. Really want to make sure that everybody benefits from this and has a say as much as possible. You know, we did write this application. We only had a month to do it, so we couldn't do surveys at that time, but we do want to take a moment and make sure that everybody's voices are heard. So we're going to have that in-depth discussion next month, and then I'm going to get to work on these initiatives, especially the ones that we need to complete in 2022, because we are now, you know, the clock is on and it's ticking. And we do need to solicit more sponsors and volunteers to make each event a success. You know, I put it in big letters. We can't make this happen without you. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have people on the ground, you're not going anywhere. So especially when we have events, we're going to need volunteers to help us set up and take down. We're going to need help with this retail marketing campaign, with talking to state legislators. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities to get involved. If you want to get involved, at any point, you change your mind at first, you're like, I don't have time. And then maybe your time clears up, just reach out. You can send a message to our washingtoncheese@gmail.com account. Reach out to me directly, reach out to any of the board members, committee chairs. We're all listening. So thank you. We are 2 minutes ahead of time. I don't know if there are any pressing questions right now. Does anyone have any immediate questions? Totally fine if not. And you can also, this, like I said, it's a lot of information. Definitely sit on this, stew over it, come back to the presentation when you have a chance. You know, if you have questions, shoot them over. We're still kind of figuring out the nuts and bolts on the USDA side of managing things, but we're going to get there. And we're just really excited that we can make these things happen this year. So a lot of them have been things that we said, I wish we could do this. I wish we could do that. Oh, we're going to do it. So thank you to everybody who made this possible, who's been involved, and to everybody who's going to be involved. We'll move ahead then. So
Brittany,
right now we're, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing. I know that you and Megan really spent a lot of time getting this in a very, very quick turnaround. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and just thank you for really making a push there at the end when it was sort of day by day in terms of what the deadline was going to be and how quickly it had to get in. And it was quite an extensive application. So thank you for that extra effort.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, it doesn't seem like a month is a lot of time, but it's not. Julia, do you have a question?
Yes, I was just kind of going back to Kalijah's report. It's going to be interesting to see, because I'm not too sure if I've really looked at your job description. The scope of the grant seems to follow what the executive director would support with a growing organization. So to, separate out the funds of, are you really working on the grant or are you doing your other role? So that'll be interesting to see how that all farms out. It was more of a comment, not a question.
Yeah, that's
Yes, that's why we need to have an attorney to write the difference in those job descriptions. Courtney specifically reached out to a law firm that John Courtney and I interviewed yesterday. And this firm specializes in just 501c6s. They're extremely skilled in making sure the job descriptions are separate and distinct. So we felt we needed to do that to protect the grant so that if there's ever an audit, there's no ambiguity. And we already have an attorney on board who wrote the job description to help work with us in the USDA to ensure that there's little likelihood of them ever questioning specifically what Courtney was doing. So we don't have to take the risk of ever having to pay those funds back. So that's something we definitely needed. And the interview we had yesterday, I think we were all very positive about it. They're just at this point doing what's called a conflict interference check to make sure there's no conflict of working with WASCA versus maybe some other organization. And then John and Courtney will be receiving the contract for review, and then we'll overlook the contract and overlook the fees. And because that is a new budget line item, we will have to come back to the board of directors with it to present it, as well as with the CPA contract. So we're in the process of working on that now.
Yeah,
Well
just
done. That's fantastic.
sorry, my dogs have decided to become active right now. And just to piggyback on that for clarification, also, that was one of the things when the AMS did ask us for comments and some edits to our application. They wanted us to make sure that the executive director's duties would be separated, like this is only for the grant and this is not related to the grant. So that's something that came from our correspondence with them, is them wanting to make sure that we have separation of duties and responsibilities. All right, so we're going to move into our committee updates now. We will come back to the grant again and again and again this year. So thank you for listening to that presentation. And since I already spoke about our grant, we don't have anything else on the burner right now with the grant applications committee. I'm going to skip over that committee update and start the committee roll call with the Education and Regulations Committee, which is chaired by Megan McKenna.
Hi, we just had one educational opportunity this year so far. We had a great little food safety online webinar that some folks were able to attend. And next week I have a check-in with David Smith, who's the director of the dairy program at agriculture. So we'll check in with him and touch base and see where he's at. If there's any new regulations or inspections coming up, to let us know. And hopefully I can pass this committee chair position on to somebody else. So if anyone's thinking about getting into the education or regulatory zone, do let us know. That would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Megan. The next committee would be the buying committee, which is chaired by Kalijah Paraska. Kalijah, do you have any updates?
Yes, I've been speaking to Adam Parisi at Fromagex since approximately last July or August. He had contacted Courtney, and we were at the process where we thought we were going to be able to bring forward a discount program offered by Fromagex. And then Adam came to me about the middle of December and said they were in the process of reevaluating all of their costing for the month of January. And then subsequently, I can't disclose that because he asked me not to, but Fromagex went through a significant increase. Fromagex imports the majority of their products from Europe. And as a result of it, what's happened with the buying supply chain of bringing things in through Europe, the cost of the shipping, the delays at customs, they had a significant increase across their book of business. So we're still trying to find a way that maybe they can offer some discount, but with the large increase they just had to have on their products because of most of it coming in from France, they were unable to give me anything that I could bring forward at this point. So I'll continue to stay in touch with Adam, and hopefully they'll be able to do something once things settle down for them with bringing in things internationally.
All right, thanks so much. Oh, go ahead.
And then just one other comment to the Cheesemakers. Do remember Dairy Connection has discounts currently that are being offered to all of their clients based upon volume purchased. And then so does the Cheese Connection. So until we're able to negotiate something with From Objects, at least the two vendors that currently do have access to things do have two programs in place through WASCA.
Yes.
Is there a coupon code? How do you do that? If you were
So
gonna-
how you do the orders with us, Rachel, is historically I have you set up in our database so that when you or Matt go in and actually place your orders, the discount automatically applies as soon as you place your order. If Matthew, and you can see that on all your invoices, if for some reason Matthew or you email him in, we actually do all the hand calculations and do the invoice showing the discounts for you.
Thanks,
And we're-
Elijah.
We're the same at Dairy Connection as well. Hi. So yeah, if you place an order online and you reach a discount level, it will be automatically applied.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you both. Okay, moving on, the marketing committee. Rachel Lucas is the chair and she couldn't be here today, so I'll just speak to marketing real quick. So marketing committee has continued their biggest initiative this past year has been monthly member spotlights of our Cheesemaker members, which have been shared predominantly on social media and on our website. We're going to continue to do those, moving around the state in a counterclockwise motion. We have a draft marketing plan for 2022, and we're going to begin including more social media posts as we can, including some spotlights of our corporate sponsors and our business members. We are also proud to announce that this week, like yesterday, we quietly rolled out our long-awaited new WASCA website. So if you have some time after the meeting, go check it out. We're very eternally grateful to Dave Bain for helping us get the website situated and switch it online for us. You know, if you have any feedback on the website, definitely let us know. There's still a couple of kinks we're working out and some pages that we're working on formatting. As we get professional photos from our photographer, Ms. Janae Muha this year, we'll be adding some of those to the website as well, kind of fleshing out some of our community and our faces who make WASCA what it is. And you'll also notice now that if you go into our members and click on each of the Cheesemakers, we've created a little scrapbook style page for each of the creameries. Some of them I'm still working on, but by the end of this weekend, everybody's going to have their own page. And so we're going to be collecting pictures and articles and things like that so that, you know, people can really get to know the Cheesemakers when they come to our website. And finally, the committee update from our all-important membership committee by Patrick Black.
Uh-oh, I'm unmuted. Okay. Hey, everybody. Just a quick thank you to all of you already re-upped for 2022. And Elijah mentioned that there's a spread between where we were in 2021 at this time. I think that's partly due to the fact that we're now renewing on anniversary date, not on calendar year. So that actually makes it a little bit more equitable, I think, for everybody. So you'll be getting invoiced if you were a former member. That's one thing we thought would be a benefit, not to bug you too much, but a little easier to have something to maybe pay off of. So Courtney, as per usual, is doing a ton of heavy lifting to make this happen. And so if you haven't paid up, expect to get an invoice from us, and hopefully you know, you can see your way clear to continue to grow with the organization, which obviously with what Courtney's presented today is just got an incredible amount of runway ahead of it. I would encourage Cheesemakers particularly to advocate with your fellow Cheesemakers to please join. We have about half of the licensed Cheesemakers that are members. It's sometimes a little bit of a hard sell for some Cheesemakers, and that's understandable depending on the size of their business. But I think any conversation among Cheesemakers is going to carry a lot more weight than coming from, you know, me or anyone else to encourage people to join. So if you can make a point to do that, we've got 3 corporate members, 2 of which have come back to us this year. Peterson Company and DPI stepped up, and Cheese Connections. So those are really nice additions and significant dollars. Actually, I believe Ferndale Farmstead is also in that category. And then I wanted to just recognize too that there's a number of larger cheesemakers that have graciously adopted the new proportional membership fees, which include, Washington State and Beechers and Apple Farms and Cascadia Creamery. Some of these folks have been doing, business in the cheese world for a while, but they're significant contributors to our overall balance sheet. So I wanted to recognize those folks. And then lastly, just a reminder for anyone that is not a member, you have got this incredible, beautiful, perishable loving bag for your $30 enthusiast membership. If you have friends, family, this makes an excellent gift, I would say. Includes your button, which I'm proudly wearing right here. And remind me, Courtney, also includes labels, retail labels. Is that correct? A roll of retail labels?
Yeah, if you're a Cheesemaker member or a business that sells cheese or works with people who sell cheese, you get a roll of stickers.
And you'll get a few of these wonderful Washington State cheese maps. And then lastly, this is our latest and greatest brochure detailing the membership benefits and so forth. It's in a very convenient trifold now. If there's any retailers out there that would like to experiment with the enthusiast class in their place of business, just reach out. We'll get you a nice little holder for these brochures. I don't think anybody's done this to date. Maybe Lindsay's got this in her store, but I think this is an excellent way to, again, broaden our base with more cheese lovers. And we've got some great cheese lovers on the list. It's not a huge list, but there's a few that also have contributed well beyond the $30. So we know that there's cheese freaks out there among us, and it's an opportunity for us to reach out and encourage them to join.
Yep, thank you, Patrick.
That's my story. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and Dairy Connections also a corporate sponsor too. Just wanted to acknowledge them also.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the committee updates. If you would like to join a committee, please, we beg you, please join us. Committees have been a little stagnant over the last 2 years, which is understandable with everything that we've been going through. But we have a lot of work to accomplish over the next few years, and we're looking forward to some engagement from our members. So before we move into the fun part of the meeting, I just have a couple of quick announcements. Actually, the first one is a very important announcement. My dogs are probably barking in the background to celebrate. First, I would like to welcome our newly elected board members to the Barking of Hounds. So quick perspective for anyone who is not a WASCA member, our board of directors is made up of 7 members. 5 are licensed cheesemaker members of the organization. The only people who have voting rights in WASCA are licensed cheesemakers. The other 2 are non-cheesemaker affiliate members who are appointed to serve alongside them. And we had 2 open spots on the board this year. As Megan and Carrie have both come to the end of their 3-year terms. So first of all, thank you, Megan and Carrie, for your service. We appreciate everything you've done over the past 3 years, your involvement, your guidance, and we wish you the best. You can always come back and join the board again in the future. And there's plenty of room for people to cycle through the board. Next year, we don't have any cheesemaker spots opening up, but the year after that, we will. So always be thinking about how you can get involved either on the board or in a committee. So without further ado, I will announce the 2 new licensed cheesemaker members who have been elected to our board of directors are Lori Conway of Conway Family Farm in Camas, and Patty Fantello of Fantello Farmstead Creamery in Enumclaw. So congratulations to both of you. We thank you for volunteering your service. I also want to extend a really warm thank you to Matthew Teller of Lost Peacock Creamery, who also volunteered for a spot of election on the board. We had to only have 2, unfortunately, but we are still looking forward to his enthusiasm and engagement this year. So thank you to everybody who volunteered and ran, and congratulations to Lori and Patty. Okay, so a few quick general announcements. First, the American Cheese Society Judging and Competition deadline has been extended to January 31st. So if you haven't done it yet and you want to submit entries into the judging for this year, you have until next Sunday, January 31st. The judging is going to be held in Minneapolis, separate from the conference. This is the first time that's happening. It's going to be May 19th through 22nd. And then the winners are going to be announced at the annual conference in Portland in July. And if you are concerned about getting your cheese to Minneapolis, definitely reach out to Bill Stevenson at DPI. DPI has offered to help ship cheeses out to the upper Midwest. So if you have concerns or are interested in that, definitely reach out to Bill. And Bill, I don't know if you want to drop your email address into the chat for anybody who's interested, but that's a great offer. And I know for some of you, that's the biggest concern in submitting your cheeses. So definitely do that. I think you also have to be a current member of American Cheese Society. So there's also that. So that's happening. For those who are involved in the farmers markets, the Washington Farmers Market Conference will be held February 23rd through 25th. We have that listed on our website on the resources page. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, go ahead to our website or to their website and check it out. The title of the conference is Charting Change and Embracing the Future of Farmers Markets Together. Another conference, the Vermont Cheese Council is offering their winter conference again this year on Friday, February 18th. I heard from some of our members who attended last year that it was extremely worth attending for a one-day event. It's a little early for us on the West Coast. It starts at 6:30 a.m. But there's a happy hour at 3 p.m. our time that makes it worth your while for attending. They just opened registration for that. We have a link to that on our resources page as well, and they have it posted on their website. If you are a current WASCA member, we will be sharing with you a discount code to get a discounted rate of attendance for the conference. It's only for current members. So if you haven't joined or renewed yet, get on that so you can take advantage of the discount. It is well worth it. And finally, piggybacking on what Patrick mentioned earlier, if you need cheese maps for your shop, your customers, to send out in the mail, whatever you want to do with them, please let me know. We have another case of about 1,000 maps left, and I want to make sure that we use them. We are going to actually be updating the map and printing new copies this spring, thanks to funds from our grant. So definitely let me know if you need more maps. I will get them to you. All right, now we've made it to the fun part, guest speakers. The first guest speaker I'd like to introduce to you today is Jessica Gigot. Jessica owns and operates Harmony Fields in Bow. Her farm makes seasonal artisan sheep cheese, offers a summer sheep CSA, and sells yarn, wool, meat, and textiles. Jessica has served on the board of the Tilth Alliance and Skagitonians to Preserve Farmland. Her academic background is in horticulture and creative writing. In the off season, she writes poems and essays and offers classes on food sovereignty, poetry, and sheep. Jessica is going to give us a short presentation on a study she completed on her farm. And we'll leave time for questions at the end of both of our talks today. So please, write them down, hold on to your questions until we open up the floor. So Jessica.
Great, thanks. And I'll just share my screen here. I can do that. Can everyone see that? Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you guys so much. I do want to keep this fun because I know it's been a long meeting so far. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a project that we did, an on-farm research project we did over the last few years. And that was funded by Western SARE. So SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, is the national organization. And then we have a Western branch that's based at Montana State University. And they have a lot of different types of programs that they fund, research projects. But they do have one grant in particular. It's called a Farmer Rancher Grant. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that, but I did want to advocate for it because it's a great source of funds if you've got a burning question you're trying to answer on your farm. They ask you to link up with a technical advisor. Usually that's an extension professional. It's a fairly straightforward grant application, but they do provide up to $25,000 to look at some aspect of research on your farm. And it's really interesting the types of projects that they get. I actually was just on a review panel for this year's projects, and I'll say that it's very heavy in the vegetable rangeland department and not a lot of dairy. So I think dairy proposals would be very competitive. So I want to talk a little bit about the questions we were trying to ask and how that affected us and how that information might help others. And then if there's any questions about applying to this program or the program in general, I'd be happy to answer those one-on-one or at another time. And I can go on. So Courtney, just pull out the hook and cut me off. We started out, let me see here, let me get my, we are a small sheep creamery in Bow, Washington, an hour north of Seattle. And we make farmstead seasonal cheese, very seasonal. We lamb in March and make cheese through September and then dry them off and do other things the other part of the year. We had a few pet sheep and I kind of fell in love with them. And so now we have a lot of sheep and actually not a lot of space. We only own 5 acres. And our sheep are mainly grass-fed. We try to get them out on grass every day, although they do have a grain supplement. It's the only way we'll get them up on the stanchion. I love this picture of this lamb. This was the first lamb that was born in March of 2020, and like the day after everything shut down. And this expression really like encapsulated my feeling for that entire year of like, what is going on? Anyway. So we are actually surrounded on 3 sides by potato fields. And potatoes are really one of the main crops in Skagit Valley. The Skagit Valley is 25 miles wide and 95 miles long, and there's about 97,000 acres in production overall. And potatoes by far, mainly fresh market red, white, and yellow potatoes are some of the highest grossing crops, and those are grown on about 12,000 acres. And potatoes require a 3-year rotation. So what a lot of potato growers are left with is a question of how to rotate. And there are very few types of producers that they can rotate with, mainly corn for silage, and in some cases grains like barley are the main rotation, but they are struggling to find something to rotate with potatoes. And land sharing in Skagit Valley is very common. And mainly it's across large scale producers. There's about, in 2017, there were about 1,000 producers with the average farm size 94 acres. Many of the potato farms are much larger than that. But land sharing is very common, which is helpful, but that also complicates rotation design. And if you're a small farm, it's very hard to actually get into that because you can't quite fit the scale that they're wanting to rotate into. And so we have our potato farming neighbors. It's 2 different farms that own the land around us. One of them is a conventional potato. The other one is a split conventional organic potato operation. And so they are always trying to figure out ways to improve their soil health, especially on their organic land, and don't have a lot of options to do that. We do have an organic Valley Dairy across the road, the Wiesen Dairy, and so they're usually the people they rotate with either for hay or corn or barley for feed for the cows. So what we were trying to do is figure out how we could start to access some of their land. They were open to leasing land to us. As I mentioned, we started to have a lot of sheep. That's what happens when you breed sheep. You have more sheep. But we're really starting to get limited in terms of how much grazing room we had. And you can see in this picture here, this is part of the potato field that we're renting for grazing for our sheep, which we do an intensive rotational grazing on. And what we wanted to do is move into more of their acreage. However, the particular landlord was very nervous about their soil health, also wondering what sheep would do to potato health quality. There's a lot of documented evidence that horse manure causes things like potato scab, which is a huge economic limitation for them. There is a lot of anecdotal information about, in the old days in Europe, they used to call sheep the golden hoof, or there was the golden hoof effect of, rotating sheep on vegetable remains or in other plots really helped to build soil fertility, but we don't have a lot of documentation of that in Western Washington, largely because there aren't that many large sheep farms. There's a bit of information in rangelands, but we wanted to look particularly at our soil and looking at how sheep grazing on this rented land would affect potato as well as soil quality. So could we be actually offering something to this larger farm, i.e. fertility, in exchange for this rotation? And could this affect, how much we had to pay to rent land and how much land we could eventually have access to? And then we also were looking at other things that I'm not going to get to today, but what are the best pasture species for dairy sheep, which there is limited information on that for west of the Cascades. And there are also just a limitation in terms of how many types of pasture species we can grow here because of how wet it is. And then we wanted to just, look at this in our farm, but think about how other farms, especially farmstead creameries, who are maybe looking for land or who are in land sharing relationships with their neighbors, what are the benefit of having these ruminant populations in the rotation? And again, in Skagit, we're losing dairies quite at an alarming rate. So in terms of animals in any kind of rotation here, there aren't a lot of options. So if there are going to be new creameries coming up or creameries expanding, it'd be nice to know that we play a role in that land sharing conversation as well, because I know it's much needed, especially in potatoes that are struggling with soil health. So let me just, this is sort of a picture above. This is our farm here. This is the land that we're renting to graze our sheep on, although as a result of this work, we've been able to kind of slowly move into this large organic piece. I'll say that our creamery is not certified organic, but all of our land is. Our flock is certified animal welfare approved. And for the crops that we grow herbs, those are on organic ground, but we did want to also keep our sheep on their organic piece. So we've been working in this piece of ground, but you can see the potential here for us to have more access to land is great. And so this information has been very helpful to us in terms of being able to access more land and make it a mutually beneficial relationship. And this really touches on a lot of regenerative agriculture principles, which I define and Rodale defines as a holistic systems approach to agriculture that emphasizes soil health. And one thing that I don't think we talk about enough is that there's a lot of ideas about what soil health is and how to make that possible. But what we're finding on the ground is that these relationships that we are making with farms across scales and across crops are really key to regenerative agriculture. So I know this particular potato farmer, even though they're a split conventional organic operation, they're very much interested in the long-term soil health throughout the Skagit Valley. And that's one thing that hasn't really been looked at very much, the long-term soil health effects of these large potato operations, which are keeping the land viable in an agriculture, but also slowly depleting the soil of its sort of inherent health properties. And so rotating with animals, opportunities for pasture as a rotation crop are really of interest to some of these larger growers. And the question I want to ask is, how can larger, more established farms engage with smaller first generation farms in a relationship that is mutually beneficial? And this grower in particular, he has a really good sense of humor, and he's always willing to answer a lot of my pesky questions. And I know we're sort of a postage stamp compared to his large farm, but as newer farmers are trying to get established too, access to land becomes a big question. And renting land is really ideal as long as you can have a long-term relationship. And so we're trying to document what we're doing here because I think it will help others in terms of entry into land access as well. And I won't go into potato diseases. That was something I spent a lot of my younger years looking at rotten potatoes. And so I'm particularly interested in potato diseases. I have a background in plant pathology, but just to say that there's a lot of things that can kill potatoes. So that's why I'm definitely not a potato farmer. And so we really wanted to be careful before we started rotating onto these potato grounds to make sure we weren't exacerbating conditions, and ideally to see if we could document that we were helping the soil. And here's all the things that can kill your potatoes. This isn't even the beginning, and I won't go through this, but scab and black dot, those are more superficial blemishes. Rhizoctonia, all very common in Western Washington. And so there were a lot of things that we could be, again, causing problems for our neighbor, and that was the last thing we wanted to do. So what we did is we had this opportunity where we were sort of moving into their ground so we could stepwise start to document how the soil was changing over time. And I'll just say that documenting any major shift in soil health takes, at least 7 to 10 years. So these grants run on a 2-year cycle. So we're just really starting to poke around and see what's changing. And so what we started to do was look at the ground here on the left that we had already started grazing and compare it to where they were actively growing potatoes. And on this, I'll say on this piece to the right, we also had grazed sheep there for a year, and then they pulled it out to go back to potatoes. So we had a chance to look and sample potatoes that they were growing for production and make sure that there wasn't a difference there compared to other areas where our sheep hadn't been.
3-minute warning.
Okay, good. Anyway, and we tried to replicate that in the greenhouse as well. And we had also, an area that we had in sheep production for a long time, pasture. And so we were able to till that up and grow potatoes over 2 years. And I was growing those myself. And again, a good reminder that I'm not a potato farmer and I don't like growing potatoes. I like eating them. But that served as a great site as well, because that was where we had pasture for 8 years. And just to show you some of the information, we had all of our soil samples analyzed at Cornell's Soil Health Lab, which I'll recommend to you. They have a great soil analysis lab. You can send in samples. They go through some of the major indicators of soil health. There's not time here to talk about that, but organic matter, soil protein, things that really speak to the biological activity of your soil, which is relevant if you're growing pasture or vegetables. And just to point out a couple of things, some of the main things that are important to me are organic matter, aggregate stability, and you can see those numbers. And this is, I'll say this is all the same soil type, which was also a nice snapshot to use. But all of these things were higher, measures were higher in our pasture field. Oops, I mentioned that. And they were also higher in the field that had just had sheep grazing on them for a year. So that really gives us a lot of hope. And there's more data and analysis here that I'm not going to share, but it did start to indicate that the sheep grazing was benefiting soil health. The other problem was just making sure that we weren't exacerbating potato diseases. Here's a real good picture of a nice, nice Rhizoctonia mycelium there. But we did observe some disease in the potatoes that were grown in the soil that had been grazed by sheep. However, we didn't find that to be higher than in areas where sheep hadn't been. So we did observe some scab as well in our pasture field trial. But these things like Rhizoctonia and silver scurf really weren't affected by sheep grazing, which was a good conversation to have with our landlord, which has also opened the door to more of his land that we can start to rotate into with our sheep. And so that's kind of our goal. And as I mentioned, this project was completed at the end of last year. So this last season, we were actually able to start rotating into this field, which when you're doing land sharing, things like fencing and all those things become a question. This neighbor here, Glenda, we got lots of phone calls from her saying that our lambs were running wild in this field, but it still was really nice, especially in such a drought year when we couldn't keep this piece irrigated as well as we wanted to, that we did have access to more and more land. So the study has helped us in that conversation. And there's other pieces related to pasture composition and things like that, which I'd be happy to talk to you about. if you're interested. And I do think, there's opportunities to look at other types of ruminants or small ruminants in grazing rotations if you're in a farmstead operation that's looking for more land. And I would definitely advocate again for Western SARE as a grant program. I'm not affiliated with them at all besides being a grant recipient. But if you're trying to look at pasture quality or soil health, there's some real interesting opportunities with them to get that funded to answer those questions on your farm. Anyway, I don't know if that was fun. I hope that was fun, but I like talking about potatoes and diseases and sheep. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to, talk to you more about the results and potato diseases or whatever you want to talk about.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I think that was super fascinating, and hopefully we can talk more about that later this year and some research study opportunities for our farmstead and dairy farming cohorts. And just as a quick reminder, we will take questions after the next guest talk. So keep holding on to it just a little bit longer if you have questions for Jessica. So now I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, Nathan Stacy, who is the Farm Program Director for Tilth Alliance. A little bio about him. Nathan was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Most recently, he was a postdoctoral research associate with WSU's Center for Sustaining Agriculture and Natural Resources. His research focused on the beneficial use of recycled organic materials and soil amendments, but he also evaluated various strategies for cover cropping and composting. He has frequently created educational programming for farmers, gardeners, and agricultural industry professionals. And he's been the Tilth Alliance's Farm Program Director for a little over 4 months. Through that role, he hopes to help local, regional, and statewide producers find solutions to their problems. And when he's not digging in the dirt, he enjoys running, reading, cooking, and hiking. Go ahead and take it away, Nate.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Jessica, great presentation. I will follow up with you because as you're going to learn now, I am a soil nerd. So I'm going to share my screen and do my best not to completely screw this up. Let's see, I should be able to do this all. Okay, can you all see a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Great, excellent, thank you. Okay, so I started thinking about cheese and I was thinking about making cheese as a great representation of the different elements of agriculture. So as I'm going to tell you here in a second, I think a lot about soil. And so if you think about making cheese, then you start in the soil and grow something to feed some animal. We keep the soil healthy, the biomass grows, then we feed it to the animal, we keep the animal healthy, and then you all that have great skills then make this wonderful project or product. And I think it's really kind of cool to think about ag that way in general, about how the different pieces come together. And I think in particular, I don't want to say it's like a renaissance, but I think there's a lot of momentum in the last decade, 15 years towards soil health, and then thinking about all these pieces as sustainable components that produce a sustainable product. And so that's kind of how I thought about presenting this talk. So I'm going to talk about myself a little bit and then Tilth Alliance about what I do there, and kind of some popular farming concepts that you may have heard about and kind of off of what Jessica had presented, and then kind of link that to dairies and where the technology fits in there. And I apologize for all those who have goats or sheep. I focused on the dairy part of this, cows in particular, because I've had some experience working with those farms. So as Courtney said, I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I got my Bachelor of Arts in Communications from there, and that is essentially an admission that I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 20 years old. I left there, I moved to Colorado and became a ski bum for 4 years. At that time, I was really impressing my parents with my decision-making process. So that was during the winters, and during the summers, I worked on golf courses, and that became kind of my exposure to science in a way. I was driving tractors around, digging holes, fixing irrigation, and having a great time. It's from there that I decided that's what I was really interested in. I went to New Jersey at Rutgers State University and enrolled in a certificate program, which is really a trade school for those interested in running a golf course. I finished that program. And it's kind of there where I really got interested in soil science. Someone actually taught me about it. And I decided that's what I wanted to pursue. So I went back across the country, came over here to the Pacific Northwest. I went back to school at WSU and just was lucky and fortunate enough to have some opportunities to continue going through school and staying in research. I finished my PhD from WSU in 2017, primarily working with organic amendments, and that was in soil science. And I decided I loved it so much that I was going to jump right into research. And I had worked with horticulturists and landscapes and golf courses at that time, and I wanted to learn something a little bit new. So I got out of that type of research and took a job at the Center for Sustaining Ag and Natural Resources, which is kind of a virtual center at WSU that's located in Puyallup. They do a lot of organic research. And I took a job there as a postdoctoral research associate, primarily looking at organic, but I'm going to list what we did. We looked at organic systems. We did research with no-till and reduced till systems, lots of work with different cover crops, organic amendments, which included straight dairy manure, composted dairy manure, biochars, anything that we could find that was organic that we could put onto the soil, we evaluated it. We also did some work with reclaimed water usage and a couple of projects with pasture renovations that weren't as successful as we had hoped. But through all of this work, I have been looking through everything through the soil lens because that's what my background is. It's called the edaphic lens. And so I have a very clear bias on when I'm talking about anything that has to do with farm because I love the soil. And I actually was just thinking to myself how interesting cheese making is. And I was kind of comparing it to my love of soil. Like I love getting in the lab and messing with the soil and doing all these chemical evaluations, but I don't get to eat it at the end of the day. So you all have a very, very nice advantage in being interested in cheese. So I was there for 4 years, and then I just recently moved to Till Alliance. And if you're not familiar with Till Alliance, it is a 501c3 nonprofit, and it works in the community with Washington farmers and gardeners to build a sustainable, healthy, and equitable food future. I imagine that most of you are familiar with the organization. In particular, I work with the farm program. And if you're not familiar with the Till Alliance's farm program, I thought I'd go do a quick review because we're also a resource provider in here to help all of you, depending on what your needs and challenges are. As far as the farm program itself, you may be familiar with the farm walks, which are just regional opportunities for a farmer to present their strategies or the way they're farming or their products to other farmers, the way they're thinking about their farming, whether it's the soil management or the dairy management or the business side of it. Those were started about 20 years ago in our partnership with WSU. They transitioned at the time of the pandemic into podcasts, and those are readily available and pretty popular as well if you're interested in that. We have the annual Till Conference, which is just a conference of farmer to farmer learning, but it's really driven by farmer interest. There's the Washington State Organic and Sustainable Farming Fund, which is going on right now. It's a grant program to support farmers that closes on January 31st. If you're interested in that, there is a website for it, and you can get some funds upwards to $10,000 this year. And I can supply that link to that later, but that's ongoing right now if you're interested in that. We also have the Farmer e-News, which is just a monthly newsletter that provides jobs, opportunities, research topics, or articles that are interesting and goes out about the middle of the month. And along with this, we have the Eat Local First and the Washington Food and Farm Finder. And this is really an interesting piece. It's a digital platform that connects consumers with local farms and markets. And you can sign up for that free, and I can provide that link as well. It's a really interesting visual way to look at what's available across the state and how you can get your hands on their products. And then a new program, which is CORA. It's the Coalition for Organic and Regenerative Agriculture. And this is really an advocacy group to support organic, sustainable, and regenerative practices. So it's going to go to the legislature and try to move forward some of these concepts and ideas that people have been talking about, for the last 5 years, the last 2 years. So that is all the farm program for Till the Lions. So we, as the farm program and in general, I think in ag, have been inundated with a lot of different verbiage or monikers you might use to describe these words. So organic, regenerative, and sustainable. And I thought I'd do like a quick review of all this. And Jessica did some nice points on regenerative ag. And there is certainly a lot of debate on each one of these definitions. So be aware of that. Though hot arguments, not only in the literature, but if you go out and talk to farmers about what these actually mean. And I'll kind of pick through at the end what I think are consistent themes through all of them that help us improve agriculture in general. So if we think about organic, what is organic agriculture? This is the easiest to define. It's a labeling term for approved methods that integrate cultural, biological, and mechanical practices, and it promotes the cycling of resources. There's ecological balance, and you're conserving biodiversity in that system. Certain things are not allowed, like synthetic fertilizers, sewage sludge, irradiation, and genetic engineering. So organic very clearly has standards and regulations. In fact, there are inspections that's regulated at the federal level, and then there are organizations that go around to the farms, as some of you, I'm sure, are certified as organic, and those strategies and things you have to meet. So it's very clear what organic is. And there's a lot of argument about what should and shouldn't be organic, and that's ongoing. But these are just a way to think about organic agriculture. And there's a lot of debate on what other products might be utilized in organic systems, and that's fair. But this, as far as describing organic agriculture, is kind of the simplest way to think about ag, as far as a way to define, sustainability and so on and so forth. Regenerative agriculture, this is a hot topic. Probably over the last 5 years, it's become pretty prevalent. Lots and lots of debate on what is and what isn't regenerative agricultural. In general, regenerative is a way to minimize soil disturbance. You want to keep continuous soil covers, so some type of biomass across the ground annually, all throughout the year. You want to have a good crop rotation in place. Their components of regenerative ag are managed grazing, as Jessica had mentioned, and you want to limit your inputs. Certain components of regenerative agriculture also have an element of agroforestry to them, depending on where you're at and who you're having the discussion with. This doesn't necessarily have a federal or national standard, though there is a group on the East Coast that's trying to promote a certain standard and regulatory regulations for regenerative ag. And I don't know that will necessarily get off the ground. Sustainable is a little bit different. In my head, sustainable is just kind of like an idea, really. It has less regulations, it's less formal. It still integrates cultural, biological, and mechanical practices. There's the cycling of resources, there's ecological balance, and you want to conserve biodiversity. We're conserving those resources now so that you can use them later. The one thing I think about sustainability too is that it becomes farm-wide, as regenerative maybe is a little bit more focused on the soil, tends to be, or the biomass. I think sustainable is a property-wide way to think about managing your farm, which includes energy and water. So somebody who's sustainable, doesn't necessarily need to be organic, and someone who is organic may not necessarily be sustainable. Now, I listed those three. There's also another one that you may or may not have come across, but it's conservation agriculture. And this is kind of another way to describe all of another approach to thinking about how you manage this land. And conservation agriculture has a lot of the same concepts as the last three I mentioned: minimize soil disturbance, there's continuous soil cover, and there's crop rotation. Less management of grazing. Generally speaking, when you're talking about conservation agriculture, you're still limiting the inputs, and there's less focus on that agroforestry. So it's kind of those four concepts right there when you're thinking about conservation agriculture. So I'm biased, I've admitted that. What is a common theme through all of these kind of concepts? Well, it's pretty obvious, at least coming from me anyway. It is the soil. We're trying to think about the soil as our starting point for all these sustainable, organic, or regenerative practices. So what does the soil do for us? You've probably seen a slide like this lots of times, but it's always good to remind yourselves. It produces food for us, fiber. It's important in gas exchange, water filtration, and storage. It has a really important function in cleaning our water. Carbon storage, obviously, nutrient cycling and storage. It's a habitat for organisms, worms, bacteria, fungi, rotifers, physical stability and support. So in the last 10 years, the term soil health has become really popular, and this kind of grew out of soil quality, at least in the literature. And soil health is really, I think, one of the reasons it's become so popular in contemporary discussions is because the methods that were utilized in the labs at the university are now becoming commercially available. So any farmer can go to a local lab, and they're starting to allow or provide these soil health metrics and the methods to do so. In particular, Jessica mentioned Cornell has had a soil health, the cash system for a number of years, and you're starting to see that here in Washington at different labs providing those different methods and the metrics for soil health. In fact, Washington State just passed at the legislature, I think it was a 1.3 million annual, I think it's $1.3 million devoted to evaluating the soil health and getting baseline numbers across the state. And that's a WSDA, WSU, and the Conservation Commission are all working on that project. So what is soil health? Soil health is defined as the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And the real change in soil health, and I imagine most of you have heard this, are familiar with this, is that we've really moved from, and not to say that we're not accounting for chemical properties, but now we're really thinking about the soil as a living thing and trying to understand those biological properties that influence the chemical properties. And so our focus is really thinking about the biology of soil, hence the term soil health. Generally, when we think about soil, we think about it in three ways. There's a lot of ways to describe soil, whether it's horizons or texture or the functions in the soil. But the easiest way, for me anyway, to think about it is that there are physical, chemical, and biological properties that we're thinking about. The physical might include texture, horizons, or structure. Texture is just the sand, silt, and clay, if you're not familiar with that, the proportion of those. Horizons are very little horizons through the soil, as it's called stratification. If you're not familiar, structure is how that soil kind of glues together. And that's an entire topic on itself. And then the chemical are just familiar things like the pH of the soil and the inorganic ions, which are the nutrients that we're trying to manage when we're thinking about creating biomass or growing forage or pasture. And then the biological, and that's pretty simple. That's just the organisms. How many are there? What are they doing? Are they a diverse group of organisms? How do they change when we alter our management strategies? And I'm sure you've all heard of organic matter. That's something that is a key component in not only just soil itself, but the concept of soil health. And if we think about organic matter, most of what organic matter is carbon. And so carbon storage in soils is really focusing and thinking about organic matter. Organic matter is also a source of those nutrients. So there's a lot of focus on thinking about organic matter in this entire system. The one thing I like to remind people is that soil health is important, and there's a context to it. So if you look at the picture on, I think it should be your left, that's a desert, and that soil is healthy in the context of the environment, the precipitation that it gets, the temperatures. That is a healthy soil. When we think about healthy soils, we often think about agricultural soils that have a lot of organic matter, and we like dark color because that means there's organic matter and there's structure to it, like good till. We've got a lot of biological organisms. It's not too compacted. Air is able to flow through that soil. So soil health is really critical, but it's also critical to understand in what context you're talking about the soil health and what is the limitation that that soil may have to its health. One soil over here may have X amount of organic matter. For example, on the east side of the state, 1 to 2%. If you get over on the west side over here, you can be upwards of 6 and 7%. There's going to be a difference there though, because of the climate and the type of soil. There's an upper limit to how healthy the soil can be. And it's just a good reminder to think about, we're defining this soil health and it needs to be put into context. So the one thing you can think about in soil health, we don't need, numbers are excellent. I'm a scientist, I love the numbers. But the one thing that we are trying to avoid in all of this is avoiding degraded soils. So you can have numbers for what the bulk density is, or how much organic matter is, or the active carbon in the soil, how much carbon is retained in that soil. And those are excellent numbers to have and excellent numbers to compare when we're looking at strategies. But overall, we're trying to avoid degraded soils. And degraded soils, not only do they hurt our ability to produce food and fiber, they also contribute to environmental degradation. So if soils are compacted and there's not a lot of organic matter, you can have lots of erosion, which can move off into water bodies and cause things like eutrophication. So in a way to think about soil health, if you kind of flip the coin, is to think about avoiding damage to the soil so that we can avoid damage downstream, environmental degradation. And then when you think about the soil and how do we manage that, or how do we promote soil health, it's through different management strategies. And there's lots of research out there about what strategies work and what strategies don't. And there's a lot of debate and argument around what strategies are the best. And these are also contextual, right? In certain environments, strategies will work. In other environments, those strategies are not going to be effective based upon a limitation that comes from the inherent properties in the soil. So just what's there. Is there a lot of sand there? Is there a lot of clay there? Those types of properties influence the management strategies. And again, sets that like a limit to how healthy we can get the soil. So if you take a step back then and think about the different strategies that there are out there, you can kind of boil it down to like 4 to 5 different approaches. And those are listed here. So I said 5, good. One of the simplest things when we're talking about getting organic matter into the soil is amending it with organics. Another way to do that is to think about cover cropping on your property, crop rotation, increasing perennials, altering your tillage. Sometimes that's not viable, but reducing that till is also an option. No-till is a strategy, a very popular strategy. And then, which is, I think, is kind of akin, or it's kind of a reflection of some old practices. We're now talking about going back into integrating livestock, as Jessica had mentioned, which we did, like 150 years ago. So it's kind of funny how it comes back around. But that's the simplest way to think about all this. And then so when I was thinking about this, I was like, okay, so that's the part of the soil and kind of the growing it. Now, what about the dairy part of it? And so I went out and looked, and I had done some work years ago thinking about dairy manure, which is an interesting thing to comment on. Here's a picture of or a map rather, of all the dairies in Washington State. There's about 290, and this I pulled from the WSDA, and this was information from 2020. And it's actually down. I think they lost about 10 or 15 dairies across the state. But that gives you a visual of these dairies across the state. And when we think about cows, and I'm sorry for the sheep and goat individuals, I focused on this. Well, what do we think about? Well, manure management is a real important, I guess, element of thinking about how we manage these types of farms. And when you think about manure, well, let's look at what manure is. It's nutrients, right? It's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, but a lot of it is water. So if you look at the box on the left there, that is the wet weight of the manure. So like 75 of just total manure. And in the column on the right, you've got that in total dry manure, or yeah, total dry manure after it's been dried down. And you're looking at nitrogen and the phosphorus, potassium in different types of cows. But the thing I want you to notice is it goes from 75 on the left there to 9.7. And that gets somewhere in like 90 to 80% water is what that manure is. And so that becomes a challenge when you have a large operation. What do you do with all that mass, right? And all that weight? And these vary. It's not always 80% water. It's not always 90. It depends on the part of the year. It depends on the feed. But somewhere in that range, the dry material is only about 10% roughly. And what about that manure? So like one cow, a dry cow, over the course of a year can produce 14,000 kilograms of manure. But I even though I have to write in, well, I used to have to write in kilograms, that doesn't make sense much in my head. So it's basically 31,000 pounds of manure, one cow. And what does that mean for us? Like 83 kilograms of pound of N per year, or 183 pounds of nitrogen per year. So if you're thinking about what you need to fertilize with, there's a lot of free fertilizer, in a sense, free fertilizer there. Now, all of this nitrogen is not immediately available. Some of it takes time to be released in the soil. But if we're just thinking it from a high level, that's a lot of nitrogen, right? That's a lot of nitrogen per year.
3-minute
So
warning.
Okay. Oh, 3 minutes. Okay. So I could go on about this forever. So let me scan through. There's also, let me shorten this up. There's also amount of carbon in that dairy manure. And so that's another thing that we're thinking about. It's not just this nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. It is also the carbon that we're thinking about. But while manure is great, it's not that simple. You have to think about how many animals and how much space do you have to deal with that manure. And there's like levels of tactics, I think. And I'm going to skip some of this to talk about the technology that's available. So this is an idealized diagram of what you could do if you're at a large scale. Maybe you have all this manure in your pits that has processed water. You take all that, you anaerobically digest it, you solid separate it. There's advanced solid separation, and then there's advanced nutrient recovery. This is the idealized system, and it's very expensive. In this process, the entire process, if we're going from left to right, and you see the bottom diagram there, we're cleaning up the water. We're extracting total solids, suspended solids, and cleaning up the water. Now, this is a really expensive system. Each one of those doesn't necessarily have to be in line. You don't have to have anaerobic digestion. You can separate these out. There are different options for each one of these technologies that you can kind of piece in together. In fact, that last one on there, which is a worm and a wood chip in, a dairy, I believe Royal Dairy is implementing that, or has been implementing that the last couple of years. That is the high end, right? Maybe a large section. There's also livestock integration, which Jessica talked about, within farm integration, where the farms diversify and with another and add another operation. And then among farm integration, which I'm glad she commented on, where you're just sharing that land and those resources together. That's kind of that mid-level, depending on your herd size. And then the last and simplest thing I think to think about when you think about this is compost. That's the easiest way to do. Each one of these has a labor and a cost associated with it, a planning cost. There's equipment. Composting is probably the easiest way to do this. In addition to the fact that the legislature is looking at bill, I think it's House Bill 1799, but don't quote me on that, to help utilize and promote compost use across the state so that it's not such a cost. So then if we circle back around to how I started, I think the interesting thing right now in ag is that there's a lot of momentum and a lot of money in thinking about these separate pieces and how to improve them. And for you all as the end user, it's a cool time to be around this. The technology is increasing. People are interested in looking at sustainability and doing things sustainably. So I will end there, just roughly on time, and say thank you. And if there's any questions, oh, we're gonna take them at the end. Never mind.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Thank you so
You're
much,
welcome.
Nate. It was super interesting, and I feel like your presentation and Jessica's dovetailed nicely together. But yes, if anybody does have questions, now is the time. We can open that up for Nate or for Jessica or for anything.
I actually have a question for Jessica, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Jessica, did you, so we did some livestock integration projects here and they failed miserably, or when I was doing research with goats, and it was because we didn't get the goat, or they did not get into the area quick enough, and there was a frost, and they didn't like, I think there's a degradation in the plant that creates, I think, salicylic acid. I think they don't like it. Sorry, I'm getting off track here. My question is, did you think about the density of your herd in that livestock integration, and what was that like, and how often did you rotate it? You may have said this. I just kind of came in at the end.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of working with, what they'll give us at this point. So,
Okay.
we are trying, we're ideally trying to have more and more access to grazing, so we don't have to bring in as much hay and aren't as reliant on our pellets, our feed for nutrition. So just to get our pasture more nutritional. I mean, I know of some sheep dairies on the East Coast that are completely grass fed. With us, I don't think it's possible to really get the milk volume that we need right now without supplementation. So it's a bit of a dance because, we were able to plant out those 5 acres. And we're just using it between April and basically September, October until it sort of, we go into breeding again.
Oh, okay.
But the organic piece that is to the east, that's just actually planted to like 1 or 2 species because they were planting it in their normal hay mix, like their Timothy hay mix. So it's not ideal. So kind of like they go through that a lot faster than our more dense pastures, if that makes sense. And we're just trying to keep up with them in terms of our electric netting, because we can't really stand out there and shepherd while they go across the whole piece. If you know anybody looking for a good shepherding job, let me know. But the land sharing and fencing is like the next question, because that, we haven't quite convinced our landlord to put in a perimeter fence just to make sure our sheep don't get out onto Chuckanut Drive. So we're really relying on those electric nets, and I feel like some days they work for us, and some days they just love to bust through it. So we're really not able to project out an ideal density. It's more of how quickly we can move them along with the fencing. So it's a bit rough right now, if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And Nate, we have a question for you from Jeff and Gorby. What was the crop during the goat experiment that you mentioned?
It was a summer cover crops when it was sorghum Sudan. So we had planted that in April, grew it through the summer, and we're trying to knock it down in the fall. And it was just somebody else had the goats, and we missed it by a couple of days, and there was a frost. So it's a good learning experience, though. There's, you're talking about days and hours.
All right, other questions for either Nate or Jessica? I don't know if this has got anybody thinking who has their own farmstead operations. If any of you are doing any of these strategies that Nate talked about or anything like that, but hopefully it's helpful to think through.
And also I'll add too, if you all have questions about any of that information, don't hesitate to reach out. I think I can provide my email address, Courtney, I think you have it, and reach out to Tild as well. We're just another resource to provide, not just, but we're a resource provider. So if you need help, feel free to reach out.
Definitely. Also, if there's any questions about the grant or anything else that we've talked about today, we can bring those up right now also. All right. How many, Nate, I'm just curious, how many dairy projects did you work on in your soil studies, or how many different farms did you work with?
We worked with, and actually, and so the one thing that we did, so I wrote a paper on dairy manure. So we kind of looked at the amount of dairy manure that's created in the state and the amount of fertility that's required in the state by like looking at all the biomass. So we, probably 3 or 4. And then we also worked with some individuals that were, it wasn't dairy, it was just cattle. They were just raising cattle. And we did manure with that as well. And that project was a SARE actually, interestingly enough, a Western SARE project up on the islands.
Oh, interesting. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? We do have another question in the chat. It's also from Jeff and Gorby on the subject of objective 2 in the grant. Do we have any data or anecdotes about the effectiveness of past recognized month announcements? We do have anecdotal information about that from other states that have a dedicated cheese month. Oregon has Oregon Cheese Month. I can't remember which month theirs is. I want to say it might be October. But they are able to use that as a launch pad, or at least in pre-COVID times, for programming and fundraising events, activities, festivals. And I think there are a couple of other states that do have dedicated cheese months, and it really has given them like a specific I mean, we always have a reason, right, to talk about our cheese and our cheesemakers, but kind of a reason for something to look forward to, especially, in social media world, people are always talking about today is National Cheese Day or National Cheese Lovers Day. It gives you something to focus a marketing campaign around. And we have seen that happen in other states. And then the American Cheese Society also has American Cheese Month, which is in May, which serves the same function, which is from a marketing perspective. Good question though. Jessica also just added the link in the chat to the SARE program if anybody's curious and wants to learn more about that.
Maybe I was just going to say, really great presentations, in the history of this organization. It's really kind of fun to see this happening. But for Jessica, really interesting stuff that you brought up. And Nate, do you offer your services in terms of consulting too? If one of our farmer cheesemaker producers are wanting some help in soil stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there is also there, and I will say that there are, not to say I don't want to do it, but there are also resources out there. If you just shoot me an email about interpretation for like soil test interpretation that I can provide. But yeah, I'm more than willing to help. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question in the chat, Fiantello Farmstead is asking if there have been any studies on silvopasture. They're currently working with the state in development on that.
The difference between silvopasture and agroforestry?
That's a good question. Nate, do you have the answer to that?
That I do not know. I do not know the difference. It might, I would have to look that up. I don't know. Sounds like it's the same.
This is on forestry.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I guess when it came up in Nate's presentation, that was what I was imagining was silvopasture for agroforestry. Lori just commented that her daughter is an assistant professor at University of Missouri who specifically works on silvopasture. And Patty, she can put you in contact with her for some more information if you'd like.
I think this is the time where we all should be eating cheese, but we're not, right?
Right? Hopefully next year.
I second that.
Yeah. We were really hoping that we could pull it off this year to do an in-person meeting or at least a hybrid, but we just didn't have very many people. Everybody liked the idea of doing it in person, but not that many people said they were actually going to show up. So I'm glad that everybody showed up here. It's nice to see you all on the screen, but let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that in 2023 we'll be doing this at the butcher's table or wherever we can find a space and actually eat cheese in person together. All right, well, if there are no other questions, and if there are questions that come up after this, if you want to send me an email, I can connect you and get the answer out to you. But we can go ahead and wind down the meeting a few minutes ahead of schedule, which is, I think, a Herculean feat considering everything we had on our agenda today. This was a really tight agenda. So I just want to thank everybody again for joining us in person. And if you're watching the recording after the fact, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the recording. For everybody, we really appreciate your time, your commitment, your support. For WASCA, you know, we really love having everybody engaged and involved. If you haven't renewed your membership for the year and it's your renewal time, if you are thinking about joining, we hope that you will come join us with a seat at the table because we've got a lot of fun plans, as we mentioned. And we want you to be part of the team and have a say. So quick reminder, be on the lookout next week for the questionnaire that's going to help us put some of our ideas for this grant initiative into action. And then in early February, we're going to go ahead and have a meeting where we can hash things out. I will be sending out. Do you have a question, Carrie?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. We will be sending out for current members the discount code for the Vermont Cheese Council Conference registration. So be on the lookout for that. And, you know, at any time during the year, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me, to the board of directors, to the WASCA email address. We're here to serve and support and do everything we can. If we don't know the answer, we'll figure it out. That's what we do best right now, is figure stuff out. So yeah, thank you guys so much for your time today. It was an honor to have you. So take care, stay safe out there. Thank you. And board members, stay online.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate and Stacy also, again. Nate and Jessica. All right. All right, looks like we have just board members now.